Before you call Armero a natural disaster, look at the map. It already showed where the mud would go. The volcano warned that it would open the door, but hesitation left the town inside, and thousands of people went to sleep in the path of a deadly mudslide. I'm Arturo, and this is Latin Laura, where we explore Latin America's history, mysteries, true crime, and local legends, always whispering intrigue. Subscribe for fresh revelations every week, perfect for your next campfire debate. On a rainy night in Colombia, a town went to sleep beneath a volcano that seemed too far away to kill them. By morning, Armero was gone, not burned by lava, not buried by ash from the sky, swallowed by a black river of mud that came down in the dark. And here is the part that still does not rest. The map already knew where the mud could go, yet the town stayed. And decades later, some families are still asking where their children went. The question is not only why Armero died. The question is, why did the warning become silent? Why did science become paper? Why was a town inside a danger zone still full of sleeping families when the mountain opened its mouth? And after the bodies, after the funerals, after the cameras left, another wound remained. Some children were rescued, moved, misnamed, undocumented, or simply lost in the broken machinery of disaster. For those families, the tragedy did not end with mud. It became a search without a grave. This happened on November 13th, 1985, in Tolima, Colombia. Armero was not a ghost town before the mountain took it. It was warm, busy, agricultural, and alive. Cotton fields, rice fields, sorghum, shops, schools, churches, markets, radios in kitchens, children doing homework, workers coming home with the smell of earth on their clothes. Around 29,000 people lived there. It was a place with plans, a place where people expected the next morning to look like the one before. Far above that valley rose Nevado del Ruiz, a volcano in Colombia's central mountains, wearing a white cap of snow and ice. From a distance, the mountain looked almost peaceful, like an elder wrapped in a bright blanket. But snow on an active volcano is not decoration. It is a secret reservoir. Ice is memory waiting for heat. And under that white silence, Ruiz still had fire, pressure, gases, old fractures, and a history that the valley had almost forgotten. Wait, notice this. Armero was not sitting on the volcano's cone. Families did not look out their windows and see lava glowing at the edge of town. Nevado del Ruiz was dozens of kilometers away. That distance gave people a dangerous comfort, but a volcano does not need to stand beside you to reach you. It only needs a river channel. Between the ice-covered summit and Armero, the Lagunilla River waited like an old road built by earlier disasters. The land had warned before. Long before 1985, Ruiz had produced mud flows that traveled down its valleys. The flat, fertile ground around Armero was not random. It was made by water, sediment, and older violence. That is one of the cruel tricks of volcanic country. The same deposits that make the soil rich can also mark the path of future death. People plant where the ground is generous, and sometimes that generosity comes from a disaster no living person remembers. The word for what came is lahar, but the word sounds too clean. Imagine wet concrete with a heartbeat. Imagine river water thick with ash, clay, rocks, soil, torn up trees, roof beams, doors, animals, cars, and pieces of houses. A lahar does not behave like ordinary floodwater. It shoves, it grinds, it carries boulders as if they were small offerings. It can fill a valley, climb into streets, and bury a neighborhood under meters of moving earth. So let us remove the wrong picture from the mind. Armero was not destroyed by a red river of lava. Lava is slow compared with what reached the town. The killer was mud born from ice. When hot volcanic material met the summit, snow and glaciers, water formed quickly. That water mixed with ash and loose volcanic earth, then rushed downhill. As it moved, it tore more material from the channels, growing thicker, darker, heavier, until the mountain itself seemed to be flowing. For months before that night, Nevado del Ruiz had not been quiet. There were earthquakes, gases, ash, and smaller explosions, signals that something beneath the white summit was restless. Colombian scientists, local officials, and international visitors watched the volcano with concern. Hazard maps were prepared. Those maps showed that lahars could run down river valleys and threaten communities far from the crater. Armero was in danger. This is the sentence that makes the story hurt. Before the town vanished, a map had already drawn the road to its grave. But a map cannot knock on a door. A map cannot lift a child from bed, put shoes on her feet, and guide her uphill through rain. A map has to become a warning. A warning has to become trust. Trust has to become movement. Movement has to happen before the river turns black. In Armero, knowledge existed, but it did not translate into action quickly enough. It stalled in offices, in arguments, in technical language, in unclear orders, and in the terrible human habit of waiting for certainty. On September 11th, 1985, the volcano gave a preview. Activity from Ruiz generated mud flows and reminded anyone watching that ice, ash, and river valleys were a deadly combination. Still, life has its own spell. The crops needed work, shops opened, children went to school. Officials weighed the danger against panic. People heard warnings, but warnings came mixed with reassurance. And when a community hears "be alert" and "stay calm" at the same time, many people understand only one thing: stay where you are. Now the clock begins. On November 13th, ash rose from the volcano during the afternoon. Around 3 in the afternoon, the mountain was already sending a dark message into the sky. Around 5 in the evening, emergency officials were discussing the danger, and the hazard map pointed toward towns that needed preparation. Armero was among them, but preparation is not evacuation. A meeting is not a siren. A conversation in an office is not a grandmother walking her grandchildren to high ground. By early evening, Colombia was under rain, thunder, and confusion. Messages moved, but not like lightning. Some warnings were passed along, some were softened, some were delayed by weather, power outages, communication issues, and doubt. By around 7:30, some rescue channels reportedly issued evacuation instructions, but it did not become a town-wide evacuation. On the ground, among ordinary families, the message did not arrive with the force it needed. The town did not empty. The valley kept its people. There was also a larger shadow over Colombia. The country was already carrying political violence, grief, and a national crisis. Just days before, Bogota had been shaken by blood and fire in the Palace of Justice siege. The state was stretched, distracted, wounded. But disasters do not wait for governments to be ready. Mountains do not check whether a capital city has recovered. While attention was divided, Ruiz kept breathing under its ice, and the rivers below waited for whatever the summit would send. Around 9:09 that night, strong explosions were heard from Nevado del Ruiz. The eruption had crossed into something more dangerous. By around 9:37, pumice was falling near the summit, and the eruption cloud was already growing inside the storm. In the darkness above Colombia, hot material met cold ice. The white crown began to melt. Water ran where water always runs, downhill, looking for channels. The first ingredients of the lahar gathered themselves like an army without a flag. From above, the scene would have looked almost simple: a volcano with snow on its head. Valleys cut into the slopes like long scars. Towns are glowing faintly in the rain. Armero is waiting far below, not beside the crater, but connected to it by the lagunilla. The mountain did not need to chase the town. The river path was already there. Every bend, every slope, every channel became part of the delivery. The landscape was not the background. The landscape was the weapon. At ground level, nobody saw the whole pattern. People heard rain on roofs, maybe ash on metal, maybe rumors on the radio. Some were told the danger was not immediate. Some believed the town was too far from the volcano. Some thought officials would give a clear order if leaving was truly necessary. And some probably wanted to leave but did not know where to go, or how serious the threat was, or whether the roads were safe in the storm. The first water and mud began reaching Armero before the worst wave. That detail matters because it makes the night even more terrible. At first, some people may have thought it was flooding from heavy rain. Then came the sound. Survivors described a roar as thunder dragged across the earth like engines, like 1,000 stones grinding their teeth. Around 11:35, the main lahar entered the town. By then, the mountain's message was no longer a warning. It was inside the streets. The mud did not arrive politely. It came bearing trees, boulders, beams, walls, roofs, animals, furniture, and pieces of life upstream. Houses cracked open. Streets disappeared. People were taken from rooms before their minds could name what was happening. The lahar arrived in waves, and later surges followed. Survival depended on impossible little things: a strong wall, a roof edge, a tree branch, a cemetery gate, a few steps of higher ground, 1 second gained before the dark water closed. Some were swept away and lived, which almost sounds impossible until you understand the randomness of a lahar. A person could die in a bedroom, while another was carried kilometers on debris and dropped somewhere shallow enough to breathe. Survivor accounts remember people climbing roofs, holding trees, clinging to ruins, calling names into the rain. Stories tell of a young man protected near the cemetery gate, and another survivor carried a long distance through the mud. In Armero, survival was not fairness. It was geography, accident, and luck. By morning, Armero had become almost unrecognizable. Around 85% of the town was destroyed or buried. The place that had been streets, courtyards, classrooms, kitchens, churches, and markets was now mud, roofs, treetops, twisted metal, bodies and voices fading from under debris. More than 23,000 people died across the affected region, with Armero suffering the overwhelming majority of the loss. Other communities, including parts of the Chinchina drainage, suffered too. Some estimates rise to closer to 25,000 because the mud left no neat records. Numbers are necessary, but they are also cruel. 23,000 is too large for the heart to hold, so the world searched for one face, one name, one voice, and it found Omayra Sánchez. She was 13 years old. She survived the first violence of the lahar, but became trapped in the ruins of her home, pinned in water and debris. For nearly 60 hours, she remained alive, conscious, exhausted, and waiting while rescuers, journalists, and the world gathered around her. Omayra's eyes became one of the most haunting images of the 20th century. French photographer Frank Fournier took the photograph that made her known far beyond Colombia. This image later won the World Press Photo of the Year. People saw a child looking directly back at them from the ruins, and they asked the question that still burns. How can the world watch a girl die and not save her? But that question arrives too late if it begins only at the edge of the muddy water. Omayra was not failed only in her final hours. She was failed before the mud arrived, when warning did not become evacuation, when equipment was not ready, when a high-risk town was not moved before nightfall. The rescuers near her were not all indifferent. Many were desperate, limited, exhausted, and working inside a landscape that fought every hand. But compassion without preparation is a candle in a flood. It lights the face of suffering, but it does not stop the water rising. Her case also forces a hard question about cameras. The world saw Omayra because journalists were there. The image carried truth, but truth has sharp edges. Was the photograph a witness or a violation? Did it honor her courage or turn her pain into spectacle? The answer is not simple. Looking away would have erased her. Looking without changing anything would have betrayed her. The only honorable use of her memory is to ask what had to fail for a child to become visible only when rescue was nearly impossible. And still, Omayra was not the whole tragedy. She was a girl, not a symbol first. She had a family, a school, a life before the mud gave her name to the world. Around her were thousands who died without photographs, without final interviews, without anyone outside Colombia learning their names. Teachers, farmers, babies, shopkeepers, grandparents, workers, nurses, students. A town is not buildings. A town is the web between people. In Armero, that web was torn in one night. Rescue after the lahar was a war against mud itself. Roads and bridges were broken. Heavy machines could not move easily over ground that swallowed weight. Helicopters helped, but they could not lift a whole town. People were trapped under beams, pinned by debris, chilled by water, injured, dehydrated, infected, surrounded by bodies and wreckage. In disasters like this, the first hours are gold. In Armero, too much of that gold was lost before help could reach the trapped. This is the lesson that hurts emergency planners. Response is not the same as prevention. A siren before the lahar could have saved more lives than 1,000 heroic rescues after it. A clear evacuation order before nightfall could have done what pumps, cameras, helicopters, doctors, and volunteers struggled to do later. Once the mud was in the streets, bravery was fighting with one hand bound. The real rescue was supposed to happen while Armero still had streets. Then came the quieter wound, the one that did not end when the mud dried. In the chaos after the disaster, children were separated from their families. Some were taken to hospitals, shelters, institutions, or other cities. Some had no papers because they had been buried. Some were too young, injured, traumatized, or confused to explain who they were. Names were misspelled. Families were dead or displaced. Records were incomplete. And in that broken space, absence began to grow teeth. This is where the story often gets pulled into sensational darkness. Popular versions speak as if every missing child was taken by one hidden hand, as if grief needs a perfect villain to be real. But the reality on the ground is already devastating enough. There were separations, lost identities, poor records, possible irregular adoptions, and families who never received clear answers. Some children may have died unidentified. Some may have survived under different names. Some stories remain claims, memories, clues, and DNA searches. To understand that pain, do not start with conspiracy. Start with a mother in a hospital corridor after the world has ended. Start with a father seeing a child on television and saying, "That looks like mine." Start with a birthmark remembered for decades. Start with a name written wrong on a form. Start with a family told to wait, then wait again, then wait for years. Disappearance is not only a mystery, it is a door that refuses to close. Groups and relatives have continued searching for answers connected to Armero's missing children. Some cases have been investigated through records, testimony, adoption files, photographs, and DNA comparisons. A few reunions and identifications have offered proof that searching was not madness, but many families still live with uncertainty. The tragedy became double. First the mud took the town, then disorder took the names, and a child without a name in the records can become a ghost while still alive. This is why the phrase, "the children never returned," must be handled with care. It is not a toy for horror. It is not evidence for every rumor. It is a wound made from chaos, neglect, memory, and unanswered questions. Some claims may never be proven. Some may be wrong. Some may be heartbroken, reaching for shape. But the search itself tells us something true. After Armero, even survival could become a form of disappearance. The ruins became a memorial landscape. Armero was not rebuilt as the same town on the same wounded ground. Today, visitors walk through remnants where streets once held traffic and laughter, a church fragment, a cross, a plaque, a tree, a piece of wall. The place looks quiet, but quiet is not peace. Some places are silent only because the voices there have become part of the soil. The mud dried, but memory kept breathing underneath. And of course, ghost stories came. They always come where death arrives too fast for a proper goodbye. People speak of voices in the ruins, children calling, shadows moving near the old town, the feeling that Armero is not empty even when no one is there. We do not have to treat every story as proof, nor do we have to mock them. In Latin America, a haunting is often memory wearing a shape the living can understand. But the most frightening ghost in Armero is not a figure walking through the ruins. It is the map. The map returns again and again because it knows. It showed the danger before the danger arrived. It knew that distance from the crater did not mean safety. It knew the river valley was a path. And yet a map locked inside weak systems is like a prayer whispered underwater. True, maybe even beautiful, but unable to save anyone who cannot hear it. The mainstream explanation is clear and painful. Nevado del Ruiz produced a moderate eruption. Hot volcanic material melted snow and ice. Water mixed with ash, sediment, rocks, and debris. Lahars raced down river channels. Armero sat in the path. Warnings existed, but were not transformed into a timely, trusted, town-wide evacuation. That is the heart of the disaster. Not a curse, not the mountain choosing victims. A known hazard meeting exposed people and a failed chain of human decisions. This does not make the mountain innocent exactly, but mountains do not govern. They do not publish evacuation orders. They do not maintain sirens, train officials, prepare shelters, or explain to farmers why a river can become volcanic even when the crater is far away. The volcano was the source of the hazard. The disaster was born when the hazard met vulnerability, hesitation, weak communication, and a society that had not prepared for the last mile between warning and action. And here is another uncomfortable truth. The eruption at Ruiz was not one of the largest in recorded history. This was not a darkening skies across the world. It was not Krakatau tearing the horizon open. It was not Mount Pelée burning Saint-Pierre in 1902. Yet the death toll was enormous. That means size was not the only killer. Geography, exposure, preparation, and decision-making turned a moderate eruption into one of the deadliest volcanic disasters of the century. Compare it with Pinatubo in the Philippines in 1991. That eruption was far larger, and still, many lives were saved because scientists, officials, soldiers, local communities, and evacuation systems moved people before the worst came. The contrast is not perfect, but it is useful. One story shows what happens when warnings become movement. Armero shows what happens when warnings remain trapped in paper, doubt, and delay. The volcano matters, but what people do with warning matters just as much. After Armero, Colombia changed. Volcano monitoring improved. Risk communication became more serious. Disaster institutions learned through a wound that should never have been the price of education. Later generations of scientists and emergency workers carried Armero like a shadow behind every alert, every map, every siren test, every meeting with communities near volcanoes. The lesson was carved into the country. Do not assume people understand danger just because the danger has been measured. The wider world changed too. Armero helped push volcanology beyond instruments and equations toward the messy human world where warnings must be believed. It helped inspire an international program to assist countries facing restless mountains so they would not have to stand alone. Scientists began to see that being correct is not enough. A correct warning that no one understands is still a failed warning. A hazard map that never reaches the grandmother, the bus driver, the teacher, the farmer, the child is not protection. It is only knowledge waiting for a door. That is why alert systems matter, but only when they are tied to action. A color on a chart means little if people do not know what to do when it changes. A siren is only useful if everyone knows which hill to climb. A radio message must say more than stay calm. It must say leave now, go here, take this route. Do not wait for the mud to prove the danger. In a lahar zone, proof can arrive too late. There is a moral question at the heart of all of this. When officials possess credible warning of a deadly hazard, what do they owe the people below? Not a perfect prediction. No human being can force a volcano to speak plainly, but they owe clarity, they owe preparation, they owe the humility to act before certainty becomes a corpse. They owe the poor and the rural the same urgency given to capitals and powerful neighborhoods. Disaster is never only natural when inequality chooses who waits in danger. Armero also reminds us that Latin American landscapes are not passive scenery. Mountains, rivers, forests, coasts, deserts, and fault lines are characters in our history. They feed us, test us, bury us, and teach us. But too often, the people asked to live closest to danger are the ones with the least power to demand protection. Farmers, workers, children, small towns, indigenous and rural communities, and neighborhoods are treated as distant until their suffering becomes national news. The dead of Armero include more than a death toll. They include family recipes never cooked again, school notebooks lost under mud, wedding photographs dissolved, land titles gone, songs interrupted, and last conversations no one knew were last. Survivors lost homes, relatives, documents, livelihoods, and proof of ordinary life. Imagine surviving and having to prove who you are after the town that knew your name has disappeared. That is another kind of burial, the burial of identity. For survivors, the night did not end with sunrise. Rain returned, rivers returned, the sight of mud returned, anniversaries returned. Some carried injuries in their bodies, others carried questions that never stopped speaking. Why did I live? Why not my brother? Why did the wall hold for me and not for them? Survivor's guilt is a second landscape, one you cannot evacuate. It follows you even when you move far from the mountain, and still the ruins call people back. They come to remember, to pray, to search, to stand where a house once stood, to speak a name into the heat. The old cemetery gate, the fragments of walls, the memorials, and the silence between them all become a kind of archive. Not paper, but place. The land keeps receipts. It remembers the path of the mud. It remembers the map. It remembers the people who were told too little. Too late. So what do we call Armero? A natural disaster? Yes, because the volcano erupted, the ice melted, and the rivers carried mud. But also no, because the death toll wore human fingerprints. The warnings were there. The hazard map existed. The town was vulnerable. The evacuation did not happen in time. Nature made the lahar. Human systems decided how many people were still in its path when the lahar arrived. And what do we do with the missing children? We do not turn them into cheap mysteries. We do not use them to decorate fear. We speak carefully. We say that after Armero, children were separated, records failed, families searched, and some questions remain open. We say that every rumor is not proof, but every grieving family deserves a serious answer. We say that in a disaster, identity must be protected as fiercely as life, because a rescued child can still be lost. At the beginning, we asked why a town died, despite the warning, and why some children never came home. The answer is a chain of ice and ash, river valleys and fertile plains, warning signs and hesitation, technical maps and unclear voices, rain and darkness, rescue without preparation, records broken after the mud. No single link tells the whole story, but together they dragged Armero into the dark. The town is gone, but it is not silent. It speaks through Omayra's eyes, through the survivors, through the parents who kept searching, through every volcanic alert that now carries Armero's shadow. It speaks through the map that was known before the mud arrived, and maybe that is the real haunting, not that the dead remain in the ruins, but that the living were warned, and still the town slept. So when a warning exists but people are not moved, what should history call the disaster? Nature, negligence, or both? And if a child survives the night but disappears into broken records, what does rescue truly mean? Tell me what you think Armero teaches us most: to fear the mountain, to distrust silence, or to demand that every map become a voice before it is too late. Muchas gracias. Thanks for trekking the hidden trails of Latin America with me. If tonight's story unsettled you, subscribe and ring the bell, because Latin America's most intriguing stories are far from over.